Well, let's have a debate all of our own around fuel prices at the moment. Matthew Parks is the Parliamentary Coordinator for COSATU. He joins us now. Matthew, good afternoon to you. I understand you actually have enough petrol in your car to be moving around today, so glad you're able to join us. We all know the economic problems here. So we have oil prices that are very high on international markets. We have, over time, the fuel levy has become more and more important to government. What should government do? I mean, where would you start as COSATU to try and reduce fuel prices at the moment?
Look, I think we all agree that the fuel price currently is unaffordable for South Africa. Already workers spend about a quarter of their salary getting to work. This is going to make it more difficult. It's going to put pressure on the food price, put pressure on other prices around the economy. It's going to even make it more difficult for Eskom. So really it is suffocating the economy. It's going to make it more difficult for companies to pay their workers to create new jobs. So something has to be done. We agree with the Minister of Finance and the Minister of Minerals and Energy, and I think most of us agree that we need to look at reducing the taxes we charge currently for the fuel price. Currently, out of about 23 rand per litre, we spend about a third of that on taxes on the fuel levy. So that's within government's control. We think we need to reduce it. We think we need to extend the relief that's currently being given to consumers, which is going to come to an end at the end of July, because really it's just unaffordable. So there is some space. Of course, you would also have to say, if you're going to reduce the taxes on the fuel price, you need to cover the shortfall in the fiscus somewhere. We think the best way to do that, besides the issue of corruption and growing the economy, is actually to give more money to SARS, the tax authority, because if you give more money to SARS, they're able to employ more people, to invest more in their technology, which can help generate more revenues to the state. I think for us, that's the best way to cover that shortfall. Besides reducing the tax burden on the fuel price, we have to get the road accident fund under control. It's got a liability contingency right now of about 400 billion rand. And currently it's because it's being mismanaged and because lawyers, the road accident lawyers, are really profiteering at huge levels from the fuel price with the road accident fund. There's a need for the Department of Transport to retable the RAF and the RABS bill back at Parliament, because those are going to help put the RAF back in a sustainable financial trajectory, but that will take a bit of time. The other kind of quick interventions, maybe not quick, but urgent interventions, is to ensure that all metro rail lines are reopened, because that helps 10 million commuters in our cities to get out of cars and vehicles into trains. We need to make sure Transnet is fully operational, because that's critical for agricultural goods and other manufacturing goods to get out of trucks and back into train lines. That's going to help put less pressure on inflation. So those are some of the urgent things we think things need to be done. We should also be looking at giving more support and encouraging more people to move into public transport, taxis and buses, etc., because all of those help to insulate the economy from the fuel prices. We have to admit that there's nothing government can do about the international oil price. We've been down this road before, Stephen, and 20 years ago when the U.S. invaded Iraq, and oil prices also hit about $120 per barrel. But we can look at these kind of short and medium-term interventions to protect our economy from the worst effects of the fuel price increases. And longer term, we should be looking at moving our vehicles, be it cars, buses, trains, taxis, motorbikes, from fossil fuels to electric and hydro vehicles, because there always is going to be a crisis around the world.
So Matthew, I mean, some of what you do, what you suggest could be done in the short term. A lot of it would be longer term. So electric cars, for example, would be longer term. Let's just put the Eskom debate to one side, Matthew. This is a polite conversation. It's not very often that people mention, where government could cut back. The DA did mention today the VIP protection unit, which is a very high budget. I mean, would that be a place where government could cut back, give something back to motorists?
No, definitely. I mean, we've raised the VIP protection unit budget in the police as ridiculous for many years. We spend about 3.8 billion rand, 3.9 billion rand on the VIP protection unit to cover about 230 politicians. It just doesn't make sense. It could easily be cut by half. I'm sure most of us could not name the Deputy Minister of Arts and Culture. And so why do you need them to have protection? It's easy to scale down. I don't think it's enough to cover the reduction we need in the taxes for the fuel price regime, because then we're talking about 50 billion rand, 80 billion rand. But look, the principle is, which you're raising is right. There is space in government to reduce some of the wasteful expenditure, some of the luxurious expenditure. But I think also, to be honest with you, the best way to cover the shortfall is simply to give more resources to SARS, because SARS has been shown to be very effective If you give them R1 billion, they can generate an additional R10 billion in tax revenue. They can simply be empowered to go after tax evaders, lifestyle audits, some of the customs fraud, and there we're talking about R50 billion, R100 billion in additional revenue we could easily generate, and that's the correct thing to do, to be honest.
There is something else, another option which you didn't mention, and I put this to you just to see if it is an ideological reason you didn't mention it, Matthew, which is it is proposed that we could deregulate the petrol price. At the moment, the price of fuel, both diesel and petrol, is very tightly regulated. Petrol at the retail level, diesel at the wholesale level. Now, the argument would go that evil capitalism would introduce competition to the market, and that would lead to lower fuel prices. Do you agree?
Look, so it's one of the things we actually have highlighted that we need to have a discussion about in NEDLAC. We've asked for Treasury and the Department of Mineral Resources to come to NEDLAC. Let's have a discussion. We think there's a case to be made around deregulating, but we need to just check if there's no unintended consequences. But we think it's something that should be discussed and see what are the options there. Currently, diesel is slightly deregulated, that you will find between different petrol stations, diesel might have a lower price, not completely. But we think there is a space to have a discussion around fuel as well. But of course, currently right now, diesel is actually slightly more expensive than petrol. But we think that we should be putting all the options on the table. Some may make sense, some may not make sense. Some might have some unintended consequences. And of course, some might be short and medium and longer term. But I think for us, the debate is necessary. I think all of us, be it government, labor, business, across the political platforms agree. Something must be done. And I think for us, the issue is, it's a question of urgency. We need to move quite quickly because the current tax relief of R1.50 per litre comes to an end on the 5th of July, and then it goes down to 75 cents per litre for August, and then it comes to an end. So we really cannot afford a fuel price regime which is more expensive than the minimum wages currently per hour.
In a way, Matthew, this entire situation has arisen. The short-term reason is because of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. You could argue COVID on top of that, all of those two issues together. But the longer-term reason is that for a very long period of time, nobody changed the petrol price formula. It goes back to the early 1990s. In fact, I think even to before 1994. What I'm trying to get to is it seems to me that one of the longer-term reasons for the problem we're in is a failure of governance over time. And I'm sure petrol price isn't the only failure of governance over the last 10, 15 years.
No, you're right. And we have to accept responsibility as collectively as a nation. But look, the buck stops with government, because government is one which drafts legislation, which manages it, etc. And of course, we could also point to the road accident fund. The fact that it's got a contingency liability of R400 billion, the greatest fiscal threat to the state outside of ESCOM. It's a failure of governance, and for many, many, many years. But having said that, we shouldn't allow a crisis to go to waste. Now is a crisis. I think we all recognize it. We can't afford to ignore it any further, because it really is bleeding workers. It's suffocating the economy. It's making it very difficult for ordinary companies to survive. So now really is the ideal time to come with a more affordable tax regime for the fuel price, to settle the road accident fund once and for all, to have a real serious conversation about public transport, and to begin a real plan to move us away from being dependent on fossil fuels to moving towards electricity and hydro, leave aside the ESCOM debate, because we're always going to be in this crisis. There is always a crisis in the Middle East, and as long as we're going to remain dependent upon fuel and be exposed to it, then we're going to be victims of the consequences of failing to plan for such crises.
Matthew Parks, thank you, Parliamentary Coordinator for COSATU. I do appreciate the time. I'm sure that you'll be driving on economy mode to wherever you're going, because the price of petrol is so high.